G'day everyone, welcome to Talking Leadership. This is Eric Perez welcoming you back to our ongoing discussions regarding leadership. Today's guest is the founder and director of the Colin James method. Can I welcome to the podcast Colin James? How are you, Colin?
Good, thanks, Eric. Thanks for having me on your podcast.
Colin, let's start where I typically start these podcasts by asking you your leadership pathway. Where was its beginnings?
I think it was in South Africa where I grew up. As a university student, I was in the anti-apartheid movement. I'm quite old now, so I'm a...
That's okay. That's all right, mate. There's no age limit to the podcast, and being someone who's in his midlife now at 45, I can understand how age can creep up on you, so that's all good, mate.
I'm in my 60s now, so it's been a while since I've been knocking around on this planet. But in the middle of the apartheid era, I had a moment when I was standing on a street called Eloquence Street, which is in central Johannesburg. And I was standing with about 300 or 400 students, not only from the university I attended, but also from Soweto, the townships. So black and white students together. And we were facing into a phalanx of police with their shields and their dogs, their tear gas, the whole 9 yards. As you've seen on television, that moment of tension between those that are protesting and those that are holding the face of authority. And in those days, there was no cameras to record what was going on. We were subjected to immense risk and danger to be beaten, if not killed. And on that day, 2 people were killed. And I was thinking to myself, what on earth am I doing here? And then it dawned upon me that what got me here to fight against such an oppressive and evil regime was leadership. So the words I heard from the leaders that were in front of us, opening our eyes to the reality of apartheid, encouraging us to act and to take action against the system, is what leaders do. So they not only inspire, they also encourage, but also they inform. And I think at that moment, I was 18 years old. It was my first insight into the power of leadership, because it was those leaders that changed South Africa, that changed apartheid and brought justice to a very evil system. So that's where it sort of really dawned for me as a starting point.
When you talk about that being can I say, seminal moment in your understanding of what leadership was about, do you think it has translated then to all aspects of your leadership thinking and journey from that point on, or was that just a catalyst to get you thinking? Because for some that in the leadership space, a seminal moment is what permeates what they do forevermore, versus some that it's the light bulb moment where, right, this is what this topic is about now. I've got my head oriented. I'm going to do something to advance the thinking in that area or do something in that space because it's of interest. So what was it like for you, Colin?
Well, it was the starting point, and it has informed my leadership philosophy ever since. So the characteristics for me of a critical and effective leader is their attributes in 3 areas. They have to be able to inform. And what I mean by that is they need to be able to communicate in a way that makes sense to the people that they're communicating to and with. Our politicians currently, honestly, leave me so dispirited, so uninspired. I've sat through thousands of presentations at conferences, and I've just left there just feeling, what was that? Someone was making noise, but I didn't feel like I was informed in a meaningful way. It didn't connect to relevance. It didn't awaken my spirit. It didn't add any additional insight into my understanding of how things work or how things could work. So the first step is to be able to inform. And the second from that point on is to engage. Now, engagement is the capacity to hold attention, to keep me feeling that I want more. The true leader facilitates followership. And followership is a product of engagement. So if you can inform well, educate, get information across through your language and words, and engage through the spirit and energy that you convey, then you fall into the third category, which is to inspire. Now, the word to inspire is to lift. It's from the Greek inspiritus, to fill with life, the breath of life. So when you inspire, you take a breath, inspiration. When you die, you expire, expiration. And we want inspiration. And it comes from that idea of clear, clean, uncluttered language, information, informing through engagement, understanding the followers' needs, wants, and desires, and connecting message to that. And then the capacity to inspire people to lift above and beyond their existing limits, to take action outside of their areas of familiarity, and to literally be contributors beyond just self. And I think, that philosophy in leaders, if we found more of that, we can transform countries, worlds, businesses, and so on. And I look for them. I try and find them. They're not that they're rare, but when you do find them, they are amazing.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, and that helps me into one of my later things. But we'll come to that in a second. So, in your travels, Colin, do you see a distinction, if I can use that word, between leaders and managers, or the managerial function?
There's a distinct difference. Now, the leader is the one that gets you to a position where you'll meet the challenge or take the extra effort to discretionary effort beyond what you expected to do, to even do the difficult thing, to do the things that are sometimes terrifying and frightening or difficult and hard. What the manager does is that they assist you in doing the activity when you get there. So the leaders lead you to something. They take you to a place, to a mindset, to a way of doing and being, to a way of thinking and functioning. But the manager then becomes the person alongside you that allows and creates the chance for you to succeed. If you want to break it down into what are called the systemic barriers, if you want to get anything done, there's three things you need. First of all, you must want to do it, inspired to do it. You must know how to do it. You must have the skills and the requisite knowledge. And then you have to have the chance to do it. In other words, the systems, processes, support necessary. I think leaders really start at the want to. They inspire you to go there, to try extend yourself. And this is the inspirational part, engagement part. The how to, where the skills and knowledge is necessary. Again, a good leader does give you a reference point by being the example. But once you've in the challenge, once you're meeting the opportunity, it's the managers that give you the chance to do it. They're there as the support function. They're there to, open the door, to give you the process, to monitor your how you're progressing, and manage the logistics. The difference is quite stark. And you can get leaders that can be good managers, but I've met some leaders that are hopeless managers, and I've met managers who can also lead, even though their strength is management. But sometimes they are two discrete things. So I do not necessarily see them connected. When they do connect, it's rare and nice, but a lot of the time it's two different functions in the fulfillment of task or ambition.
Thanks for that, Colin. I like that part of the statement you made in particular where you said managers, although specialists, can create opportunities for leaders to do the things that they need to do. And often in these podcasts, people have said to me, leaders and entrepreneurs have said to me that some of the best outcomes they've had and decisions they've taken have come through the expertise of others. And you've put it in a very nice and simple way to look at sometimes the people around you can create the environment that will allow you to thrive as a leader. And I can pick many examples in my career, and I'm sure you can yourself. Have you seen that play out in action in some of the leaders that you've met, or situations that you're aware of where someone has sort of given someone that capacity to shine in their role as leader?
So I'm currently thinking of a guy, a man called Shane Paladin. Shane Paladin is a global leader. So he runs the SAP software business, where he runs one of their businesses. They have a sales function which sells software, and then they have the services and support function which implements the software. He runs that business. It's a multi-billion-dollar business, somewhere in the region of 70 billion, and it's a massive concern. Now, here's a guy who runs the world. He's 44 years old. He's young. But what he does is that he creates the context. He creates the direction, and through the strength of his vision has been able to restructure an organization. But when it gets down to the work, he hands the work back, and he uses the term, "I'll always give the work back." The leader-manager person sometimes struggles with that because, first of all, they lead, but when it comes to managing, they want to get too involved. They want to get elbow deep. It's also the thing they love, right? They get juiced on the doing. But the real exceptional leader is the one that can know when to delegate and let go, not to micromanage, not to over supervise, not to constantly check. A case in point is two companies I'm working with in Australia at the moment, and I won't mention names. And I'm working with two of their two divisions, both HR functions. In the one HR team, the engagement scores are woeful, sort of 40, 50%. This is for an HR team, so you can imagine. The other one is in the 90s. Now, they do exactly the same work. They work in exactly the same industry, and they have more or less the same number of employees in their functions. So why is one in the 90s and one in the low 50s? Well, I can tell you it's the leader, because the leader at the 90s, she is a clear visionary. She not only brings this enthusiasm, this vitality, and this visionary questing quality, she also trusts her people to get on with it and do it. She trusts the people to manage. The other one, as you can guess, is someone who hasn't understood the distinction between leading and managing. And what he is he's a manager with about 10% leadership. So he looks at everything. He's got to be, informed. He wants to sign off. He wants to triple check. And, his poor team are just feeling like children being supervised by a dominant teacher. So exactly the same work, exactly the same industry, with more or less the same people with the same qualifications, two completely different outcomes. And I would suggest that's a leadership manager problem. And obviously we're trying to work with him to try and let go, to trust, and to understand what leadership genuinely means.
Leadership sometimes conceptualized as a lonely road, a lonely pathway. To what extent do you agree with that? Do you think leadership is a lonely road, or is it as lonely as you want to make it?
I think the latter. It's as lonely as you want to make it. However, there are times when it is up to the leader, where you can't reach for another opinion. You can't democratize the decision making. You can't go through another round of consultation. There's time when it's now, and it needs the decisive, unsupported decision, which sometimes goes against the grain and sometimes pushes against the crowd, that where the good leaders will emerge. Again, it's the easy path is to go the populist route, because the populist route does provide, you will get followership. Pushing against the popular opinion, against the conventional thought, can and will be a lonely experience. Right here in Victoria, in Australia, we are seeing the fact that we have a state leader who's being vilified and condemned by certain elements of the press. They're hurling invective and abuse against this guy, saying I won't even go into the pathetic language that is being employed to try and condemn a man who, in the face of an existential threat without precedent, there's no rule book, there's no blueprint, is endeavoring to ensure that the citizens, the people that he's responsible for, are protected from the threat of death and illness. I can't imagine anyone being in that position, let alone myself. The courage that it takes to be there and do it relentlessly day after day after day after day with unbelievable pressure. And I would imagine at times, does feel lonely, particularly if he had a look at some of the invective, as I've described, that he's receiving on a daily basis. Now, again, he's staying calm. He's holding his ground. He's not being rocked emotionally by the abuse that is being flung at him. This, for me, tells me that he's a leader. But I can imagine he does feel a bit alone. When there is a coordinated campaign against him, I can imagine that must be wearing. But that's what leaders do. They ride the hate at times. They have to ride the bullying that can and does occur. And I trust that what we will emerge out of this better. Compared to the rest of the world, we're doing great. So let's keep going. But, yes, at times it can be lonely, but of course, good leaders build good communities around them. They find their tribe and they work collaboratively, including the ones that will whisper in their ears when they need to hear the message that they are maybe going a bit off track, that in the Roman generals, as you know, they always had a slave on the chariot going, whispering into the ear, this is with the Caesars, remember you're human, remember you're human, remember you're human. You're not a god. So you do need those people around you to keep you grounded.
Sure, Colin, that's brilliant. And one thing I will agree with, that irrespective of your political cut in this kind of environment, you just want the best leaders to step up and do what it is that they need to do to prevent disease and death in the community. And I think it's a bit rough to be throwing stones at someone who's trying to navigate a pandemic. That exactly what you said. There is no playbook for this. Most people in living memory haven't experienced this, and you're doing pretty well if you survived the Spanish flu at the start of the century to be alive now, to be able to compare the two and how we've done. Beyond that, I think it's at times people are a bit and can be, and this is those that aren't in leadership positions, can find it very easy to throw stones at someone for what they're doing, yet put someone in that same position, how could you do any better? That's always the question I've got, is in a crisis situation, you do the best you can with the information you've got, and you're hoping to do the best for your community of interest. And unfortunately, I guess if you're the leader of a state, let alone a country, you've got that whole community to be worried about and everything that goes with it. So that's a great example you use, mate. To move away from the, I guess, maybe negative overtones of loneliness in leadership, can I ask you about measuring success? Now you've been around for a while, like myself, and you've seen leaders and you've seen businesses and organizations at their best and worst. For you, how do you measure success, mate?
The answer, of course, is it all depends on context. So what is the context that you're operating in? So if you are running a business and it's a publicly floated company, you've got a number of stakeholders that you've got to satisfy. You've got a shareholder, you've got analysts, you've got your staff and employees, and you've got customers. And each of those have different success metrics. They see the world differently, and they have different needs, wants, and desires. So the leader knows how to balance the scorecard, understands that what you measure and what you define as success will ultimately achieve the capacity to meet the needs of those constituents. But it's always about the people that you are leading. What's the best possible outcome from their perspective? And your capacity to drive towards that. Even it might be arduous, it might be difficult, and there could be pain and consequence along the way. The outcome as described at the beginning is achieved. People often use metaphors like, climbing mountains and stuff. And that's easy because the summit is right there. You can see it. It's very measurable. I think this is why we love data, because it does give us the evidence that determines progress. Numbers particularly are everyone's go-to, again, because of ease. But it's difficult to measure the softer metrics around a culture. How do you create a culture which inspires, encourages, and lifts people collectively? And again, so a leader has to really consider a whole bunch of variables in trying to analyze what success is. The one consistent thing that I have found with leaders, though, they are really never, ever satisfied. It's like, it doesn't matter if they have achieved everything. There's always that thought of, how could I have done that better? Could I have enhanced that outcome? Could I have improved that experience? Could I have managed the process getting there differently? And this low level, almost perpetual state of discontent seems to be the price you pay for being a genuine leader. Not that they don't, relish and enjoy and celebrate success, but their next thought is next. What's next? Because that's what leading is. It's towards a future, and that future is never quite attained. So I would suggest that from a leadership point of view, the external success measures are complex and varied. But from an internal success measure, making sure that you're also leading yourself, that you are not a frazzled wreck of a human being. And I've seen some people that are successful in their work context, but have terrible home lives. They're lonely, they don't have friends. Sometimes, I'll give you a story. This was about 12 years ago. I was talking to a very senior person in an Australian company, employed about 20,000 staff. And, he was respected. He was liked. He was achieving good results. The board liked him. His staff liked him. All that sort of stuff. So he was, in fact, on any measure, a good leader. I worked with him as a personal one-on-one coach, and I discovered that this guy was living in a caravan on his own property. His wife wouldn't allow him in the house, and he could only see his 2 daughters on the weekends. And he didn't want to leave the property because he was not trusting what his wife would do. And his personal life was a disaster. So I'm thinking, what's the price you're paying here, right? This sadness going home to this awfulness. So is that a successful leader? Is this someone who is living the best life? No. Is he in one context doing well? Yes. But maybe the best leaders are the ones that know how to integrate the full suite of the life requirements. Difficult, man. It's tough. But
have you got the formula you can share with us, mate, so we can get there? Because I think what the temporal stuff I think rings true personally for me, that at some points in my leadership journey I've done well, but at the expense of my family situation, as in didn't see the kids as much as I wanted to, was taking out potentially stress when I came home as opposed to doing it at work. And that sometimes it's hard to sit back and be as introspective as I think people need to be, to go, well, if my work is getting the best me, shouldn't my family get the best me as well? And sometimes I think as human beings we forget that, and I'm yet to find a leader that is fair dinkum about this, that will say everything is perfect in every aspect of their lives. I think we're all a work in progress, Colin. I reckon if one of us has got it perfectly down to maximize happiness and everything else in life, please give me that formula. I'm happy to share it with the world. I don't think we're quite there yet, but at least if we've got conversations like this and others out there that people can listen to, that you can take a bit of a reality check that sometimes you need to actively try and get a balance. I mean, even the trying is a good sign of someone that's trying to get some balance in their leadership, I would suggest. Does that ring true for you?
I think you used a very important word there, the formula. And one thing that leaders do is they rewrite formulas. Because, the conventional formula that we are all offered is the life path formula. You're born into it, if you're lucky, into a 2-parent family. Somehow you get through your first early childhood development, then you go into this factory system called schooling and education. And when you're about 15 or 16, someone will say to you, so what are you going to do with your life? You've got no idea, you're hormonal soup. Then you finish school, and now what are you got to do? Become a young adult. What's the formula suggest? Well, you can further study or get a job, get some social and economic independence from your family. So you now become someone who's now living on their own or living in a community. Now you've got to find your soulmate. That's the formula. Now you've got to look around, find the person meant for you. And then the 3 M's kick in, which is marriage, mortgage, maternity, because that's what the formula suggests. And so now you've got to work hard. You've got to try and raise a family. You've got to pay off a mortgage. You've got to keep a career. You might change jobs, change states, change countries. You've got to have an affair or 2, not mandatory. You're trying to look after your kids. At some point you're going to go, what the hell am I doing? But I've got responsibilities now, so you get through all of that. Then they talk about retirement and superannuation. And so finally you're starting to get to the end of that time. Your kids grow up and they leave home, bye. And then who are you? Oh, we've been raising kids for 30 years. Nice to meet you. And then you do retire. What happens then? Well, people will wish you well. You buy a caravan, you drag it around Australia for 10, 15 years, you die. That's the formula. Well, I don't think that's a valid formula. I think that's a compliance formula that was constructed in the 1950s. It's a post-war suburban construct. And what leaders do is I start to articulate better ways of thinking about how we live and how we work, how we balance our lives and how we operate. Jacinda Ardern, I know she's almost a cliche now, but she is an example of this. A woman who had a baby is prime minister, who does FaceTime from her lounge room in her workout clothes, whilst she attends to her baby. She's not married. I just love this. She defies the formula, and this idea of formula defiance is part of it. I think it's about how do you manage and negotiate? How do you, the people that you do have in your life, how do you break out a formula expectation? And I'm really excited about the emerging generation who are under 23, 24. Are more switched on, more globally centric, more networked group of human beings have never existed before. Not only are they digital natives, they don't think in hierarchies, they think in networks. They're breaking all the rules. Even right now, it's pronouns. I just love this. They're saying, well, why the hell should you be defined by your pronoun? He, she. Now, at one level, my 63-year-old goes, what the hell? Of course you're biological, but I love the metaphor that it's saying. Question everything. Don't be defined by the conventions of what's preceded us. And this is where leadership comes in. Leaders rewrite formulas. They're not bound by the expectation of the social conditioning. And that's where I get excited about the leaders I'm seeing that are emerging into companies and hopefully into governments. That I think that'll take longer. But who knows? Once this post-COVID world exists, I think we're going to have a very different reality we'll all be occupying.
Yeah, well, COVID, it's funny you say that because I had a lengthy discussion with a very good friend of mine, and this is a little bit off topic, but I'll bring it back in a second, that in a post-COVID world, I'm thinking there isn't going to be a post-COVID world. It's going to be the same world with COVID now existing, and we have to deal with that as a society. It's just happened to hit us in a very big way that other disasters, if you want to call them that, has not, because it's been a global situation to deal with. But just and in getting back to what you said before about how do you deal with a new reality, I like the use of the term networking, and that, yeah, I've met a lot of younger leaders through this podcast, but through my own travels and just talking to people that are in different age cohorts. And I think it's interesting for those that are in my cohort in the mid-40s, that I've got the wealth of being able to speak to leaders that have 20 years on me and leaders that have got 20 years less than me, and finding out what that thinking is happening at those three levels is very interesting. And what I am seeing is this idea of networking is coming to the fore through responses to COVID in some industries, not all industries, but I think in some, people have seen that the strength of my business comes from the strength of my people. If I can support my people, they will reciprocate that in ways that hasn't been seen before, because a lot of times, and I think this is true for some industries, that until you get a chance to demonstrate really what you're about and what your bona fides are as not just a leader, but a human being thinking about other human beings you work with, that's the test of a good and effective leader. And I use good in quotation marks, because what I value in a good leader will be different what someone else values in a good leader, other than to say, I think what you brought up before about leader capabilities, being able to communicate, engage and inspire, these are things that should be part of every leader's toolkit, which allows me to segue nicely into that theme about leader capabilities. So you've mentioned those three. I would suggest, I'd love to hear your view on this, that having those three as your base toolkit, I also believe in, and I'm doing some studies on this, and I consider myself a very early career researcher into what leadership really is, that for me, strategic thinking and foresight is something else that needs to be part of that toolkit. Now, I'm not saying one is more dominant over another, but to be able to see the environment at a macro and micro level is important for how you deal with the environment in which you're working in, and to be able to develop and look at possible alternatives and possible futures is also important for a leader to have in their toolkit. Now, some will do that better than others, but what's your sense of that in terms of those two other capabilities, strategic thinking and foresight?
About 20 years ago, they raised this concept of adaptive leadership. How do you adapt to a volatile, uncertain environment? And one of the requirements of the adaptive leader was the understanding of complexity. And in seeing that things aren't just a linear, logical problem-solving issue, that adaptive challenges have no solution. There's no ready recipe to reach for, just like the pandemic. And they both are strong advocates of having the cognitive capability to think in complex, sophisticated ways, which then leads to strategic thinking. Strategic thinking is not easy. It's bloody hard work. And most of us aren't wired that way. We don't think that way. We know the word and we can say it. And I've sat through many a leadership team meeting environment where they throw this word around like confetti, but the understanding of the implications of what a strategic mindset is, the ability to have foresight, to think in scenarios, is a rare skill. And if you don't have it, you've got to outsource it. You've got to find someone who does have it. I have met some strategists who are not leaders, but they do have that mindset, that uninhibited, open mind view of the world. But they don't necessarily translate that into something productive, and they might need to find allies to do that. Most entrepreneurs have that imaginative way of seeing and perceiving the world. They do see the world differently to us. But remember, most entrepreneurs fail. The ones you hear about are a small percentage of the ones that are crying in their basements right now. So it is about finding your tribe. It's finding that connection of the right people blended together, as you said earlier, Eric, because it is without the power of a cohort, it's going to be bloody hard work. But yeah, learning to think strategically is possible. Understanding that you've got to hold your mind open, be aware of your biases. Self-awareness becomes fundamental to this. Understanding your own motives and intentions, and also the value drivers that are underscoring everything that you do, is all part of leadership work. Leaders that don't have a lot of self-awareness tend to end up despotic or sociopathic. And I have worked with a few of those. I mean, we've got a living, breathing example in Donald Trump. I mean, this man is the most dangerous human being on the planet right now, full stop. The fact that he has millions of people that revere him is beyond my comprehension, and yet there they are. So we've got to understand that people are still craving the tyrant style, but if we can find strategic foresight and then start working around what are the new archetypes for the emerging world, that's where we're going to have an opportunity.
Do you think leaders are born or made?
That's the question that I think has been knocked around the meeting tables of many organizations, amongst educators, amongst philosophers, around anyone that ever explored the idea of leadership. The interesting thing with leadership is there's no all-encompassing description for what a leader is, because context can create a leader. The least expected person in a certain situation suddenly emerges, bang, and they lead for that time. They're exactly the right person for that moment. And yet after that is it gone, that person's leadership is no longer necessary. They no longer lead. So was that person born for that? Were they conditioned for that? Is it something to do with the socialization of it? Is it somehow your magical neurological structure that came through your genetic system? Is it what you were exposed to in terms of content, knowledge, insight? So I think it's not an either or. It's an and. Some people seem to have a natural predilection to lead from an early age. They just somehow have something in their personality. But I've seen those that seem to have nothing emerge as very strong leaders once the chance was given, the opportunity was provided, and the support around them was appropriate. So I would suggest that leadership can be taught. There are principles, there's behaviors, there's competencies that can be acquired. So what then does it come down to? I think it comes down to intent. Do you want to lead? And if you want to lead, you will find your space. You'll find your place. And no, not everybody wants to lead. In fact, I'd say the majority of people would prefer for others to provide the pathway, to be the prescribers of the formula, to provide the social environments in which they occupy and live. But the risk of that is, well, you'll get the hand you dealt, and you can't complain about it, because unless you want to do something, you are going to be a follower. If there's work to be done, step up. If there's something that has to be said, say it. If you want to take the risk and recognize you might be ostracized and condemned for it, well, that goes for the territory. So born, something you can learn, something you're born with, something that can be made. I think it's somewhere in between of all of it. It's a mix of all of that.
Yeah, appreciate that, Colin. Looking back on it, your own leadership pathway, what would you do different if you could go back and speak to Colin in his early 20s about what leadership was about, what would you say to a maybe younger version of yourself, mate?
You need to realize that no one anywhere really knows what the hell is going on, that we are all just making this up. I only realized that in my early 40s, because I thought people knew what they were doing. I really did. I thought people that were in government actually knew what they were doing. I thought people sitting around executive tables and in boardrooms knew what they were doing. Now I know they didn't. They don't. They are just like everybody. We're just making this shit up. And we're trying to do it with our best intention. We're trying to get the best information and knowledge to support and guide us. We're trying to work it out. But we've got this thing called life, and you are born, and where you come from, nobody knows. When you die, why you die, and where you go after that, nobody knows. It's a kind of a mystery. And as human beings have evolved over centuries, trying to make sense of this, how you collaborate, cooperate, how do you live together? How do you not kill each other in the process? And how do you make sure that everyone can be nourished, supported, fed, housed, sheltered, educated, and healed is a constant work in progress. We are a massive social experiment. Now, if I'd done that in my 20s, I would have been more courageous. I wouldn't have taken so many things on face value, and I would have tested the formula earlier. So that's why I'm excited by 23-year-olds. I love the fact that they don't respect status, and they don't respect how old you are. They only respect one thing: competence. And so just be good at what you do. And stuff the age, forget the title. Who cares what your position is? If you are someone who wants to lead, contribute, and add to a better society, better world, a better way that we can all live together, I'm with you. I'll back you 100%. So that would be my advice.
Colin, that's amazing, and thank you for ending the podcast on a very positive note. So for those listening, I've been speaking to Colin James, the designer, the founder of the Colin James method. Colin, thank you for your time, mate.
Eric, thank you. It was a pleasure.
No worries. And for those listening, this has been Talking Leadership. I'll catch you all on the next podcast.